You look at the listing, $1 million, and for a moment it doesn't look like what you thought it would. The number is at the bottom of the listing, and the house above it is not the house the number implies. 3 bedrooms, a yard that's respectable but not generous, a neighborhood that's good but not remarkable. This is where most people think they understand what they're looking at. It's also where most people get it wrong. You close the listing, open it again, do the math on what the monthly payment would be. The way you always do, the way everyone does, automatically, before you've decided anything.
That hits.
You look at the number, you sit with it. Hello, I'm Lincoln. And there's something about $1 million homes that almost nobody explains clearly. Not the price, not the payment. What it actually means to afford one, and why those two things have drifted so far apart that most people don't realize they're asking a different question than the one they think they're asking. There's a story that attaches itself to certain numbers. 7 figures is one of them. $1 million home carries a specific cultural weight that has been accumulating for decades. It represents something in the imagination, not just a house, but a version of life, a confirmation. The particular kind of arrival that happens when the work you've done and the income you've reached translate into something physical and permanent and undeniably real. $1 million in the story is what success looks like. When it has a roof on it, that story is still active. You can feel it in how the number lands when you say it out loud. In the particular way people respond when it comes up, even people who are clear-eyed about money, who understand what markets are doing, feel something when the threshold is crossed. The story has cultural momentum. The market has quietly moved past it without notifying anyone, because here's what's happened. In the country's most economically active markets, $1 million has been quietly redefined, not by announcement, gradually by the slow pressure of demand and constrained supply in the places where people who earn enough to buy at this level actually tend to live. A local one. But local enough in enough of the places that matter to change what the decision actually means. The sense of arrival the number was supposed to deliver arrives in a muted form, and the muted feeling is harder to explain than the price. What does $1 million actually represent where you're looking? Let me draw a picture, not a calculation, just a way of thinking about what's actually happening when someone buys at this price. Imagine 3 layers. The bottom layer is income. The middle layer is housing cost, not just the mortgage, but everything the house requires to sustain. Taxes, insurance, maintenance, the ongoing financial commitment that a property of this size and price involves. The top layer is margin, the space between what you earn and what the house costs. The space that determines whether your financial life has flexibility or is simply managing the obligations it's taken on. Here's the thing. A lot of people can qualify for $1 million mortgage, the income required to get a bank to approve. The loan exists in more households than you might expect, particularly in dual-income professional families in high-cost markets, where salaries reflect local norms. The bank looks at the income, runs the ratio, and arrives at an approval. What the bank doesn't assess is the margin. The bank has no form for whether the life that exists after the payment is a life with room in it, whether the months will be managed or genuinely comfortable, whether an unexpected expense becomes a disruption or a crisis, whether a career change or a period of uncertainty will be survivable or the thing that sets everything back. The bank approves the income. Life audits everything else. Qualifying is not the same thing as affording, and the distance between those two things is where most of the stress lives. The house isn't expensive because of the price, it's expensive because of what it removes. Here's a story. Her name is Diana. She and her husband had been working toward this for years, both professionals, both with careers that had developed steadily, a household income that sat comfortably in the range that $1 million home requires. When the house came up, it was the right neighborhood, the right size, the right moment in their sense of what their life was supposed to look like. They stretched slightly, not dramatically. The payment was within the range the bank had confirmed. within the range their financial planner hadn't objected to. The stretch was real but defensible, responsible even by the standards of the decision they were making. Within 18 months, the texture of their financial life had changed in a way they hadn't fully anticipated, not because anything went wrong, because everything that was supposed to be manageable was manageable, and managing it left less than they'd expected. The repairs the inspector had flagged as minor became expensive in the way that minor repairs always become expensive in a house of this size. The property tax reassessment was higher than their estimate. The social expectations of the neighborhood, the things nobody lists as costs but that operate as costs nonetheless, added incremental pressure to a budget that didn't have much room for incremental pressure. Diana will tell you the house was the right decision in most of the ways that matter. She won't tell you it was easy. She'll tell you, if the conversation gets honest enough, that she thinks about the payment differently than she thought she would. You don't say it out loud, but the payment is in every decision now. Now a different version. His name is Tom. Same general income range as Diana's household, same market, same general time frame. He bought the $1 million house too. Different property, slightly different neighborhood, same tier. Someone who saw the listings Tom passed on. The difference was the margin he preserved going in. Not because he earned more, because he and his wife had made a specific decision in the months before closing that the distance between the payment and their income had to have real room in it. They passed on 2 properties they genuinely wanted, properties that would have required them to operate at the edge of what the income could sustain, because the edge wasn't where they wanted to be. The house they bought was good, but not their first choice. It was smaller than what they'd been looking at. The backyard was fine. The neighborhood required no apology, but offered no bragging rights either. And then, 3 years in, it became the right choice, in ways that weren't visible at closing and couldn't have been. Tom's company went through a restructuring. His role changed. The new version wasn't what he'd been building toward, and the right response, the one that made professional sense, was to look seriously at other options, including a period where the income might be lower or less certain. He looked seriously. He had conversations he wouldn't have been able to have if the payment had been at the edge of what they could sustain. He moved. Different company, better trajectory, a 6-month stretch of adjustment. That was real but survivable. The house was held. The payment cleared every month. The margin he'd preserved at closing was what made the move possible. 5 years from now, you won't remember the listing. You'll remember what it made possible, or what it didn't. What would you do differently if the payment left more room? This is the part of the $1 million conversation that doesn't appear in any listing description. The cost of a home at this price is not only financial, it's structural. It quietly reorganizes the shape of your decision-making. It creates a floor, a specific, monthly, non-negotiable floor that every other decision in your life has to clear before it can be considered. And when that floor is high enough, it starts to reduce the category of decisions that can be considered at all. Career risks become more expensive. The job offer has a better trajectory, but a lower initial salary has to survive the payment. The period of income uncertainty while a transition completes has to survive the payment. The decision to step back, to try something, to tolerate instability in exchange for a better eventual outcome. All of it has to survive the payment first. For most people, most of the time, the payment survives. The careers continue, the income holds, the life inside the house functions. This is the version that looks fine from the outside. The mortgage clears, the neighborhood holds. The house is, by almost any visible measure, working. But function and thrive are different standards, and what the margin between them costs, in stress, in the decisions that quietly stop being available, in the version of your professional life that operates in permanent proximity to its financial limit, that cost is rarely included in the calculation people make before they close. It doesn't fit in any form. there's an uncomfortable truth at the center of the million-dollar question. Most people who buy at this price point are not buying the house. They're buying what the house represents. And proof is expensive in ways that don't appear on the disclosure documents, and that's not irrational. The desire for the house to mean something beyond its square footage is real. The identity layer of a housing decision is not a mistake. It's just usually not accounted for in the financial one. The problem arises when the identity purchase and the financial purchase point in different directions, when the house that confirms the story is also the house that leaves the margin thin, when the arrival costs the flexibility that was supposed to fund everything, that was supposed to come after it, when proving something to yourself becomes the most expensive purchase you make. You only notice this late at night, when the math is done and the listing is still open and you're not sure what you're waiting for. Two people can look at the same million-dollar listing and be making entirely different decisions. One is asking, can my life sustain this? The other is asking, does this house look like where I'm supposed to be? Both questions feel identical from the inside. They're not. When those two answers point in different directions, the identity answer usually wins. The financial consequences don't arrive until years later. By then, the decision is already the house. 1 decade after buying at $1 million, the cost of the decision becomes visible in its full shape. Not in the house itself, which is likely worth more and looks about the same. In everything the decade produced around it. For the people who bought with real margin, who passed on the property they wanted because the distance between the payment and their income wasn't wide enough, the decade looks different. Not just financially. In the accumulation of decisions that were made from a position of genuine choice rather than managed constraint. The career moves that were possible, the risks that were survivable, the years that were hard but didn't threaten the house. For the people who bought at the edge, who stretched defensively, who managed every month, who made it work through discipline and nothing going seriously wrong, the decade is also functional, often genuinely good by most visible measures. The house appreciated, the neighborhood held. The kids grew up in the school district that justified the stretch. But inside the decade, invisible to almost everyone outside it, is a different texture. The decisions made under the quiet, persistent pressure of a payment that leaves little room. The opportunities that didn't survive the floor. The difference isn't visible in the house. Both houses may have appreciated at similar rates. Both neighborhoods may have held. The difference is visible only in the life built around it, and only clearly, usually, in hindsight. It's visible in the conversations someone did or didn't have with their employer, in whether a health situation became a financial emergency or a difficult year that they absorbed, in whether the period between jobs lasted as long as it needed to or ended prematurely because the payment was real and relentless, whether the career arrived where it was heading or got redirected by constraints that had nothing to do with the work and everything to do with the structure of the financial life the house required. These are not small differences. They compound across years in the way that financial structures tend to compound, quietly without dramatic events. In the aggregate of decisions that each look small and together determine the shape of a decade. You don't explain this to anyone. Most of the people around you are living inside the same structure and not saying it either. The question then isn't whether you can afford $1 million house. The question is what kind of life you have left after you do. What remains after the payment, the taxes, the maintenance. The invisible costs of sustaining something that requires this much of you. What becomes possible, and what quietly stops being possible in the years that follow. In terms of the margin, the room that remains after the payment, after the taxes, after the maintenance, after everything the house requires to sustain. The room that determines whether the next 10 years are built on a foundation or spent managing around the constraint of a number that never adjusts, never waits, and never asks how you're doing. Qualifying gets you to the closing table. A lot of people sit there every year. Margin is what determines whether everything that comes after it was actually worth the price.